All right, you're having too much fun. I'll show you my dark side in a minute. This is a poem from the new book called, which was one of these other kind of stopping or tracks, sentences from Juan Ramon Jimenez, and he said at some point, "The worst thing about death must be the first night." It wasn't bad enough the way I was envisioning it earlier, but that I figured if that's true, then let's follow the hypothesis. So I address Jimenez in the first line, and it's just called "The First Night." Before I opened you, Jimenez, it never occurred to me that night and day would continue to circle each other in the ring of death. But now you have me wondering if there will also be a sun and a moon, and will the dead gather to watch them rise and set, then repair, each soul alone, to some ghastly equivalent of a bed? Or will the first night be the only night, a darkness for which we have no other name? How feeble our vocabulary in the face of death, how impossible to write it down. This is where language will stop, the horse we have ridden all our lives rearing up at the edge of a dizzying cliff. The word that was in the beginning and the word that was made flesh, those and all the other words will cease. Even now, reading you on this trellised porch, how can I describe a sun that will shine after death? But it is enough to frighten me into paying more attention to the world's day moon, to sunlight bright on water or fragmented in a grove of trees, and to look more closely here at these small leaves, these sentinel thorns whose employment it is to guard the rose. Well, thank you. This poem comes next, so seems okay. This also has a little epigraph. One of the questions that always comes up in poetry classes and workshops is, how do you know a poem is over? Well, you wait for the Hare or Lawrence Ferlinghetti to show up. That's the answer. But Paul Valéry, the French poet, had a kind of smart alecky, kind of a cryptic answer to this. And he said at one point that, I'm not going to do a French accent to make it even more ridiculous, but he said, poems are never completed, they are only abandoned. It sounded kind of, when I first read it years ago, it's striking, but then, I kind of used it in class a lot, and sometimes I would credit Valéry, and sometimes I just forget to. And then I realized at some point I didn't really believe it anyway, because I actually spent a lot of time finishing poems. So I really wrote this poem to kind of repudiate its own epigraph. Poems are never completed, they're only abandoned. And the poem is titled January in Paris. That winter I had nothing to do but tend the kettle in my shuttered room on the top floor of a pension near a cemetery. But I would sometimes descend the stairs, unlock my bicycle, and pedal along the cold city streets, often turning from a wide boulevard down a narrow side street bearing the name of an obscure patriot. I followed a few private rules, never crossing a bridge without stopping midpoint to lean my bike on the railing and observe the flow of the river below as I tried to better understand the French. In my pale coat and my Basque cap, I pedaled past the windows of a pâtisserie, or sat up tall in the seat, arms folded, and clipped downhill, filling my nose with winter air. I would see beggars and street cleaners in their bright uniforms, and sometimes I would see the poems of Valéry, the ones he never finished but abandoned, wandering the streets of the city, half-clothed. Most of them needed only a final line or two, a little verbal flourish at the end, but whenever I approached, they would retreat from their makeshift fires into the shadows, thin specters of incompletion, forsaken for so many decades. How could they ever trust another man with a pen? I came across the one I wanted to tell you about, sitting with a glass of rosé at a cafe table, beautiful, emaciated, unfinished, cruelly abandoned with a flick of panache by Monsieur Paul Valéry, big fish in the school of symbolism, and for a time president of the Committee of Arts and Letters of the League of Nations, if you please. Never mind how I got her out of the cafe, past the concierge, and up the flights of stairs. Remember that Paris is the capital of public kissing. And never mind the holding and the pressing. It is enough to know that I moved my pen in such a way as to bring her to completion. A simple final stanza which ended, as this poem will, with the image of a gorgeous orphan lying on a rumpled bed, her large eyes closed, a painting of cows in a valley over her head, and off to the side, me in a window seat, blowing smoke from a cigarette at dawn. Let me read a couple of shorter poems. This one is fairly short anyway. It's something you hear on the radio, especially in NPR stations. It's kind of the same announcement over and over again, but a different name every time. And it's called Surprise. This, according to the voice on the radio, the host of a classical music program, no less, this is the birthday of Vivaldi. He would be 325 years old today, quite bent over, I would imagine, and not able to see much through his watery eyes. Surely he would be deaf by now, the clothes flaking off him, hair pitiably sparse. But we would throw a party for him anyway, a surprise party, where everyone would hide behind the furniture to listen for the tap of his cane on the pavement and the sound of his dry, persistent cough. And this is just 8 lines long. It's called No Time. No Time. In a rush this weekday morning, I tap the horn as I speed past the cemetery where my parents lie buried side by side under a smooth slab of granite. Then, all day long, I think of him rising up to give me that look of knowing disapproval, while my mother calmly tells him to lie back down. That's pretty much the two of them. And this is, I mentioned the length of these. Philip Larkin said once that he, one of the many reasons that he didn't like to go to poetry readings, I just heard a quotation by Seamus Heaney's wife, Mary, who said, "There's no such thing as a short poetry reading." But one of the reasons Larkin didn't like to go was that he could never tell when the poem was going to end, you know, so, because if you have the poem in front of you, you can see the ending approaching and you can make emotional preparations and all that. So I'll just, this is 9 lines long. This is based on an expression that you hear very often among the young, especially, and the expression is "Oh my God," and that's the title of the poem. The other expression is "I was like oh my God," which is a little harder for me to understand. But this just sticks with the simple "Oh my God." Not only in church and nightly by their bedsides do young girls pray these days. Wherever they go, prayer is woven into their talk, like a bright thread of awe. Even at the pedestrian mall, outbursts of praise spring unbidden from their glossy lips.